Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Heil Gott, dich loben wir, which translates to Lord God, we praise you. This is a pretty important melody in the Lutheran tradition, and this is a very interesting chorale, a very interesting chorale with lots of harmonic intrigue throughout. So it has kind of an unusual form, has an unusual, I don't know how to, I guess I do know how to describe it. Let me just think. Has like an unusual profile to it. The fact that it's in 4 and the harmonic rhythm is like really 1 and 3, which it typically is in duple meter chorales, but the fact that the harmonic rhythm is exclusively on 1 and 3, and the fact that we don't really have harmony on 2 and 4, or rather the fact that 2 and 4 are being used as sort of passing beats is interesting. It's just an interesting chorale to look at. Just on the page, just visually, so it was striking. We have no key signature, and we spend a lot of time on keys other than C, just as a heads up. But we're just going to hop right into the analysis and talk about the interesting tidbits as we get to it. So no key signature, we start on E minor, we end on C major. We actually start off in the key of G major, so it's not super obvious. This is an example of a chorale that's not... its key is not indicated by its starting and ending pitches, nor by its key signature, but I think we start in the key of G major. I think you could analyze this in the key of C major as well, but I think the G major analysis is a little bit cleaner, but we're going to talk about this very interesting chord in the beginning. So we start off with E minor, E, B, E, and G. That is our 6th chord, and then probably the most interesting chord in the chorale. We have F, A, E, and A. Now I'm gonna posit the fact that this E right here is actually a suspension. It's a 7/6 suspension over the bass. This suspension becomes kind of a theme across the voices. There's some imitation going on between the alto, the tenor, and the bass. They get this staggered suspension figure across these next several beats. So really we have a D minor triad here, and D minor in the key of G major is not a chord. It's not a diatonic chord, at least. It would be borrowing from the parallel minor, and typically even in the parallel minor we don't have a... there isn't an absence of leading tone typically in the 5 chord. We see it sometimes, but this is very unusual, and the chord sounds equally unusual. So this could be some Mixolydian action going on here. Maybe there's some modal influence going on here. I'm going to put a Mixolydian question mark going on top of this chord, but I think this is a minor 5/6. It's D minor with this E3, so this 7/6 suspension over the bass, this E turning into D. But really what's happening here is a chromatic bass line, E, F, F sharp, and G. I wonder why that is being employed here. I don't know enough about the history of this particular melody being used in other compositions that might have influenced Bach, but moving to the key of, or moving more towards a normative progression in the key of D major, we get F sharp, A, D, and C on the next beat, which is D7 over F sharp. That's 5/6/5. Remember this chord progression of minor 5/6 going to 5/6/5 for later. And then we have G, A, D, and B. Another suspension here, this time a 9/8 suspension. This looks like a or like a 4th species counterpoint assignment. But yeah, we have G, G, D, and B, which is our tonic G major. And then that goes to, we have another sort of suspension in the bass. This time it's like a 9/10 suspension under the tenor. I think that's the most likely, or under the melody as well, a 9/10 suspension. So we really have F sharp, A, D, and A, which is 5/6, before we get E, G, G, and C. That's C major in first inversion, so a bit of a deceptive progression here. The chord turns into root position on beat 2. And remember, beat 2 is off the harmonic rhythm in this chorale. Sometimes we get some subdivision, especially near the end. The subdivision is going to change, but this is really more of like a codetta, like a tagged on ending. The chorale very easily could have ended right here. But yes, we move to another 5 chord, D, F sharp, D, and A, which is a root position dominant triad, and then we cadence on our tonic in a perfect authentic cadence here, G, B, D, and G. Okay, looking ahead, we have a half cadence at the end of this phrase in the key of A minor, so we're looking for a point in which we modulate from G major to A minor. There are adjacent keys on the circle of fifths, so this is a logical destination for Bach to go to. We know that Bach doesn't always go to the most logical destinations, or the most expected maybe is the best one, because he's able to work his way into whatever key he needs to. It's just his harmonic vocabulary is, limited, or more limited. He really stretches the foundations of tonal harmony for the time period. He really pushed the envelope rather. So we have another G major chord, G, B, G, and D, some voice rotation going on. And notice how we're getting the opposite descending line here. We get G, F sharp, F, and E, E, F, F sharp, and G. So this D minor chord is going to play a role in this modulation as a spoiler. So G major, that's another 1 chord we don't need to reanalyze. We have F sharp, A, and D. That's D major in first inversion, another 5-6 chord. Notice how we've only really seen 5-6 chords so far. And then we have the C here, which is a non-chord tone. It turns it into a 5-7 chord in first inversion. If you want to analyze it that way, you could. Maybe I'll put the 5 in parentheses down here, but it's off the harmonic rhythm, so for all intents and purposes it is not a chord tone, even though it could be. And then we get F, B, A, and D. Now, I was tempted to analyze this as B diminished, or B minor 7 flat 5 over F, which would be 7-4-3 of 4, because B is the leading tone to C, and C is our subdominant. But I think this chord is occurring again if we take this B as an accented non-chord tone, or like a 4-3 suspension over the bass. This is just a D minor triad in first inversion again. F, A, and D. So I think in a really wacky roundabout fashion, this is another minor 5-6 chord, and it is our modulation point to the key of A minor. It is our 4-6 chord now. Really bizarre stuff. I've never seen this chord used, and it's really fascinating how it's being contextualized in this situation. But 4-6 goes where we would expect it to. It goes to 5, E, B, G sharp, and E, which is the dominant in the key of A minor, E major. And then we have, remember, this is on beat 4 here. It's a very interesting rhythmic choice here. Why is it not half note, half note? It's dotted half note, quarter note. It's interesting, but still it resolves to our tonic A minor, A, E, and C. And as we move to our cadential progression here, we have D, A, F, and D, which is another D minor triad, this time in root position, not in first inversion. And then we have D sharp, A, F sharp, and C. Interesting chord. This is a secondary leading tone chord. This is D sharp diminished over, no, that's actually in root position, so 7-7 of 5, because D sharp is our leading tone to our dominant, E major. And then we have E major, E, E, G sharp, and B, which is our 5 chord, so it's resolving where we expect it to. Unlike this secondary dominant here, if you did so choose to analyze it that way or look at it that way. All in all, very fascinating chorale so far, really refreshing stuff in comparison to the pretty run-of-the-mill harmony we've been seeing in the last couple of chorales. Despite their density or other cadential quirks and stuff, the harmony's been pretty straightforward. So this is a breath of fresh air, because I know Bach is capable of writing really interesting progressions that really break the mold. He thought outside the box. He really was like an innovator as far as his harmonic progressions were concerned. So looking ahead, we have a plagal cadence. I know we don't see these all that often, but a plagal cadence in the key of C major. So we're looking for a point on which we modulate, and I really don't see any reason to suggest that we don't just modulate right out the gate. We have A minor here, A, E, A, and C, which I think is a delayed resolution from this E major chord, just like how we had a delayed resolution here from this E major chord, E to A. It happened after a longer pause than we would expect. Here we have a resolution happening after a longer pause as well. I wonder if that was intentional. I'm sure it was. But I think this is where we're modulating to C. This is now our, so sorry, it is not our 3 chord. I was thinking the other way around. It's actually our 6 chord. And the paper I'm printing on does not erase very well, so pardon me for the smudge marks. I'm going to try and keep erasing to a minimum. And then we go to C major, C, E, G, and C. That is our 3 chord. Or sorry, that's our tonic in the key of C major. It is our 3 chord in the key of A minor. That's where I got confused. And this E right here is a chord tone, and it would be like a 8/7 suspension. So we know it's not really a suspension that's going on here. Or I guess it's like more than... No, this is an octave apart because this is treble clef down an octave. As I notate it, because that's the clef I'm used to reading from. I'm a tenor, or at least when I sing most of the time I get a tenor part, like a low tenor, like 3 or tenor 3 or tenor 4. So, yeah, I'm used to reading from bass clef. Or I'm used to reading from bass clef, but I'm even more used to reading from tenor clef or treble clef, an octave down. Tenor clef too. But yes, this is a passing tone. We then have F, C, A, and C. That's F major in root position. It's our 4 chord, it's our subdominant. Then we have a couple of passing tones in the alto and the bass. Gives us a little bit of a passing 1/6 chord. I don't think it's super important to mark it, so we'll just talk about it. E, C, G, and C. If this were not pretty much exclusively harmonic on the, the harmonic rhythm really hasn't been like strictly, if it had not been strict on 1 and 3 up until this point, I would analyze that chord, but I don't think it's super important. Okay, then we have D, D, F, and B. So 4 is going to 7, B diminished over D, which is 7/6. This E is a passing tone, and then we get F, C, F, and A. So a transitive progression, we would expect 4 to go to 7, but here we have 7 going back to 4, which is interesting. And we have a passing tone here in the tenor. And then we have C, C, E, G, and C, which is our tonic, C major. Then we have F, C, F, and A, which is our 4 chord again. We're getting a lot of 4 in close proximity now. And then we have an anticipation here in the melody. And then we get an interesting plagal cadence. We have the 5 in the melody, which we haven't seen enough plagal cadences in the chorales thus far to really give it a hallmark, but typically the 5 in the melody is something you expect in a half cadence, so the fact that it's happening in a plagal cadence, I think that that's telling of something as well, but it really makes us feel like G is still being focalized here, despite the chord underneath it not being G, rooted in G rather. So this is still our tonic triad, so we have 1-4-1 plagal cadence. Okay, looking ahead, we are looking for a point in which we modulate to the key of G major, and I think we do so right away because we get F sharp right here, and this is an imperfect authentic cadence at the end of this phrase, so I think this C major chord also doubles as our subdominant because C is also the 4 in the key of G, so we have one of these alighting phrases. So here we have D, C, A, and F sharp. That's D7 in 3rd inversion, so 5-4-2. And we would expect that to go to 1/6 as the chordal 7th resolves down by step. B, B, G, and D, which it does, 1/6. Neighbor tone in the bass, passing tone in the tenor before we get B, D, G, and D, which is another 1/6 chord. No need to reanalyze. We then get E, G, and B. Turns it kind of into a 6 chord there, E minor. I don't think we need to mark it though, it's not super important, it's just the E that's changing. But then we go to C, G, C, and E, which is C major. We know that that's our 4 chord from earlier. And we're seeing the same delay that we had before, the same rhythmic profile. It's very striking because the harmonic rhythm up until this point has been even, and now we have it disproportionate. Beat 1 gets a lot more emphasis than beat 4 does. But we have another one of these chords that I'm calling like a delayed passing chord, or it's not happening on the harmonic rhythm. It's an A minor triad, A, C, E, and C, which would be our 2 chord. Notice how A minor was also the triad at the end of this this rhythmic section before, so maybe it might be a coincidence, I don't know. But then we have F sharp, D, A, and D, another 1st inversion 5 chord. The only root position 5 chord we've seen so far... Oh no, we've seen another one in root position. Dang it, I was going to say that there was something about 5 chords being in first inversion. Well, still in my defense, there has been a lot of 5 chords in root position. Or sorry, first inversion. Or just inverted in general. But yeah, I don't think read too much into that. We also have a 5 chord in root position here, don't we? Yeah, I'm going to walk that back. We actually have 3 5 chords. 5 3 chords. No, 3 5 chords. Getting ready for our cadence here, imperfect authentic cadence while thinking about 5 chords. It makes sense. And the chord gets turned into, well, a root position 5 chord. We'll just change the figured bass because we do introduce the 7th there. So this is a D7 chord in root position, so we'll just change this to 7, 5, 3. Well, actually, hold on. We have D, D, F sharp, and C, so trying to keep my erasing to a minimum. This is not 7, 3, the 7, 5, 3, but rather just 7, 3 because there's no 5th above the bass, so the figured bass should not reflect that. And we have an anticipation in the melody, which then takes us to our G major chord. And remember, this is an imperfect authentic cadence because we don't have the tonic in the melody. We have the third of the chord in the melody, and we've actually had a good, like gamut of cadences so far. We've had a perfect authentic, a half cadence, a plagal cadence. All we needed was a deceptive cadence, and we would have our 4 textbook cadences that we run into, which would be really cool to see in one chorale that wasn't like made by a textbook for the sake of a factor, just demonstration. It'd be really cool to see one in the wild, but here we have one with 3 of the cadences. That's pretty neat. And here we have our coda, or what I'm calling a coda. It's a tag section that clearly looks very different from the rest of the chorale. It's a melisma. We have Amen being said over the entirety of this section, and unlike what we would expect the chorale to end with, a plagal cadence, also called the Amen cadence, it actually ends with a perfect authentic cadence because it's the end of a chorale, and that's what we would expect. So shame on us for expecting anything different. We do modulate to the key of C major, though, which is actually the home key, which is what the key of the piece reflects, and it's what makes me feel like, there's like some Mixolydian or maybe even Lydian funny business going on. Like, what if we were in the key of C major throughout all of this until we modulated to the key of G over here? But I think it's more likely that we're in the key of G, especially because he reverses course. Literally, he reverses course of this chromatic progression here. So I think this is just an anomaly of a chord. So this G chord is now our 5, and then we immediately go to 1. We have the 5th and the 3rd of the chord introduced, and then the little bit of counterpoint going on in the lower voices. The upper voices are paired together, the lower voices are paired together. So this is a tonic triad. We have some passing tones going on here in the upper voices. We have some passing tones going on in the lower voices as well. C, E, E, and C is another tonic triad, so we don't need to reanalyze. But we do get A, C, E, and C happening on beat 4, which would be a 6 chord. This D and this B are both delayed passing tones, just like what was happening after beat 2. We then have A, C, and A, which is another 6 chord. We don't need to analyze. Passing tones in the lower voices before we get D, A, C, or F, A, C, and A, rather. Sorry, I got mixed up in my clefs. That's a 4 chord happening on beat 2. A little bit of syncopation going on. We have like a chord on 1, or really a chord on 2. I might actually just put the chord on 2. No, the 1 chord is being implied on 1. I'm just going to put it there. But then the chords are separated by, 2 beats, 1, 2, and then they happen on the 3rd beat until we get the end of the chorale, which sort of normalizes the rhythm. But we have some passing tones in the lower voices, and then we get D, F, D, and B, which is interesting. That's a 7 chord in first inversion, which is where we would expect a 4 chord to go, but we would also expect a 4 chord to go to 5 in a perfect authentic cadence. But we have this passing tone in the alto before we get this is really interesting cadential chord. We have 7, 6 going to 5, so we have this 2, 5, 1 movement in the bass, D, G, C, but this is not part of a 2 chord, it's part of a 7 chord, which is interesting. And it makes sense. 4 wants to go to 7 more so than wants to go to 2, but in a cadential context, we're much, much more likely to see a 2 chord in this situation, but inverted. So the fact that we have a D in the bass, it's a toss-up. The chord progression works, but regardless, we go to G, G, F, and B, which is an incomplete G7 chord. That's our 5 chord. And then we cadence on C major, C, G, E, and C. It's by definition a perfect authentic cadence, but kind of unusual because the predominant chord is a dominant chord itself. So kind of unusual to see 7s and 5s paired together. I usually think about the whole I guess the whole part of the cadence that has, or the whole part of the progression that has 7 and 5 in it, whether it's 5 going to 7 or vice versa, as just a big dominant, rather than thinking about 7 going to 5 as its own explicit chord progression, because it doesn't really achieve trajectory because the chords are functioning the same way. But you know, sometimes a chord progression, its trajectory is staying in place. It's just static and halting movement, because really tonality, at least to me, it's about movement and it's about getting from place to place. And Bach detours and takes rests and moves along and does all sorts of different things and meanders the entire breadth of the scale and the key and various and multiple keys through his progressions. And I think this is an example of that, because we have a very long chorale here, at least long temporally, right? Not so long to analyze, but definitely long in terms of how spaced out the harmonic rhythm is. It's like half the length of what double the length of what we're expecting in a 4/4 chorale. So, but that being said, that's all I really have to say. This is a really interesting chorale. This first chord right here, I don't know how I feel about it. I want to say that it's a beautiful moment, and I think it's a beautiful moment. It's a very beautiful moment because it's interesting and something we haven't heard before, or if you're following along with me chronologically in these videos, it's not something we've heard before. But it's definitely very foreign to the sound, and I think that that's what makes it beautiful, is that it sticks out, and it sticks out, but gets brought back into line. It's like a disobedient chord, but it gets punished right after by being brought back into context, or brought back into focus maybe. So it's kind of like that, like the class clown. It's almost like the person who is realizing the figured bass, or someone who's playing continuo for this rehearsal forgot to add the F sharp, and Bach said, no, we're going to keep that in the actual chorale. So it's interesting. I'm definitely super fond of this chorale. I'm going to keep it in my back pocket for demonstrative purposes, so that I can show people like, hey, look at this cool chord that we found, or that I found. It was a fun chorale to analyze. So thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel. If you're interested in a daily dose of analysis, or more specifically, a daily dose of analysis of Bach and his chorales, subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification icon will notify you when I upload, which is once a day. And if that's a journey that you'd like to follow, I'd be more than happy to have you. That being said, I want to thank you again so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.